I thought I was rushing to the hospital to celebrate the happiest moment in my sister's life. Rachel had been trying to get pregnant for 2 years, and when she finally called to say she was in labor, I dropped everything to be there for her. I grabbed flowers from my garden, the baby gift I had been saving, and drove through traffic with my heart full of excitement. But as I walked down that sterile hospital hallway toward her room, I heard my husband David's voice drifting from behind the partially closed door, and the words that followed shattered my entire world. Before I share what I discovered that day, and how I got the ultimate revenge, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will not believe how this family betrayal unfolded and how I made them all pay for their deception. My relationship with my younger sister Rachel had always been complicated, but I never imagined the depths of her jealousy and manipulation. Growing up, Rachel was the baby of the family who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. She was beautiful, charming, and had this ability to make everyone around her feel special, while somehow always positioning herself as the victim who needed constant support and attention. When Rachel married her high school boyfriend Tom 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. Tom was a sweet guy who worked construction and treated Rachel like a princess. They had a small, beautiful wedding that I helped pay for because Tom's family did not have much money, and Rachel wanted everything to be perfect. I did not mind contributing because I loved my sister and wanted her special day to be everything she dreamed of. Rachel and Tom struggled financially from the beginning of their marriage. Tom's construction work was seasonal and inconsistent, and Rachel worked part-time at a local boutique that barely covered her personal expenses. They lived in a small apartment that they could barely afford, and Rachel frequently called me in tears about money problems, utility bills, and her dreams of buying a house and starting a family. My husband David and I were in a much more stable financial position. David worked as an IT consultant for several major companies, and I had built a successful freelance graphic design business that brought in substantial income. We lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a desirable neighborhood, drove reliable cars, and had savings that gave us security and freedom. We had been trying to have children for several years without success, which was a source of pain for both of us. When Rachel started having fertility issues, I was one of her biggest sources of support. I researched doctors, drove her to appointments, and even offered to help pay for fertility treatments if insurance did not cover everything. During this time, Rachel became very close to David, often calling him when she was upset and asking for his advice about financial planning and career decisions. I was glad that my husband was being supportive of my sister during a difficult time. David had always been charming and helpful, which was one of the things I loved about him when we met 5 years earlier. He had a way of making people feel heard and understood, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy helping others solve their problems. When Rachel started confiding in him about her marriage troubles and financial stress, David spent hours talking with her about budgeting, career options, and relationship communication. What I did not realize was that these supportive conversations were evolving into something much more intimate and inappropriate. David began meeting Rachel for coffee to discuss her problems, always framing these meetings as him being a good brother-in-law who wanted to help. Rachel would text him throughout the day asking for advice or just to vent about her frustrations with Tom and her job situation. I started noticing changes in both David's behavior and Rachel's attitudes toward me around the time she finally got pregnant. David became more distant and critical, often making comments about my work schedule and questioning whether I was spending money responsibly. He would bring up Rachel's financial struggles and suggest that we should be doing more to help her and Tom prepare for the baby. Rachel, meanwhile, became increasingly needy and demanding of my time and money. She wanted me to take her shopping for maternity clothes, help decorate the nursery, and contribute to a college fund for the baby before it was even born. When I expressed any hesitation about her requests, or suggested that she and Tom needed to take more responsibility for their own finances, Rachel would become emotional and accuse me of being selfish and jealous of her pregnancy. The dynamic in our family shifted dramatically during Rachel's pregnancy. Our mother, who had always favored Rachel, became completely obsessed with the upcoming grandchild and treated Rachel like she was made of glass. Every family gathering revolved around Rachel's pregnancy symptoms, her cravings, her doctor appointments, and her endless list of things she needed for the baby. I found myself feeling increasingly isolated and unimportant in my own family. David's behavior became more confusing and hurtful as Rachel's due date approached. He would cancel our plans to help Rachel with various pregnancy-related tasks, spend hours on the phone with her discussing baby preparations, and even attended several of her prenatal appointments when Tom was working. When I questioned why he was so involved in my sister's pregnancy, David accused me of being unsupportive and selfish about family responsibilities. The most painful part was watching David lavish attention and care on Rachel's pregnancy while remaining distant about our own fertility struggles. He had stopped accompanying me to my doctor appointments and seemed uninterested in discussing adoption or other options for starting our family. When I tried to talk about my feelings of being left out, David dismissed my concerns as jealousy and told me I needed to be more mature about family relationships. During the last month of Rachel's pregnancy, I noticed that David was receiving text messages at odd hours that he would quickly delete after reading. When I asked about these messages, he claimed they were work-related, but something about his defensive response made me suspicious. I also observed that he seemed to know details about Rachel's pregnancy that she had not shared with me, directly suggesting they were communicating more frequently than I realized. When Rachel went into labor on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I was in the middle of a client presentation when David called to tell me the news. He said he was already at the hospital with Rachel and Tom, and that I should come as soon as possible. I was surprised that David had gotten to the hospital so quickly, since he had told me he was working from home that day, and our house was 20 minutes farther from the hospital than Rachel's apartment. I finished my presentation as quickly as possible and drove to the hospital with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I was genuinely happy that Rachel was finally having the baby she had wanted so desperately, but I felt uncomfortable about how excluded I had been feeling from family events recently. I hoped that the arrival of the baby might bring us all together and help repair some of the tension that had been building over the past few months. The maternity ward was busy when I arrived, with families clustered in waiting areas and nurses moving efficiently between rooms. I stopped at the nurses' station to ask about Rachel's room number and was directed toward the end of a long hallway. As I approached her room, I could hear voices coming from inside, and I slowed down when I recognized David's voice mixed with Rachel's and our mother's. I was about to knock on the door and announce my arrival when I heard David say something that made me freeze in the hallway. His voice was clear and casual as he said, "She has no clue. At least she is a good cash cow." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I instinctively stepped closer to the door to make sure I was hearing correctly. My mother's voice responded immediately, and her words were even more devastating. "You two deserve happiness. She is just a useless failure." The cruel tone in my mother's voice as she dismissed me was shocking, but what came next was worse. I heard Rachel laugh, a sound that was filled with satisfaction and malice, as she said, "Thanks. I will make sure we are happy." I stood in that hospital hallway holding flowers and a baby gift, while my husband's sister and mother discussed how I was nothing more than a source of money for their happiness. The conversation continued for several more minutes as I listened in growing horror and rage. They talked about how I had been funding Rachel's lifestyle without realizing it, how David had been redirecting money from our accounts to help Rachel, and how they had been planning to continue this arrangement after the baby was born. The most sickening part was hearing them discuss their relationship as if it was a romantic partnership that I was somehow interfering with through my existence. David talked about how much he loved spending time with Rachel and how natural it felt to be involved in her pregnancy. Rachel described how David understood her in ways that Tom never could. My mother encouraged them both, saying that real love could not be denied and that I should be grateful to contribute to their happiness even if I did not understand the situation. I realized that I was not just overhearing a conversation about financial manipulation. I was discovering an emotional affair that had probably been physical as well. The timing of Rachel's pregnancy, David's intimate involvement in her prenatal care, and the way they spoke about their future together suggested that David was likely the father of the baby I had come to celebrate. Standing in that hallway, I made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. Instead of confronting them immediately, I pulled out my phone and began recording their conversation. I wanted evidence of their betrayal and their callous discussions about using me financially. I stood there for 15 more minutes, capturing their detailed plans for continuing to take my money while building their life together behind my back. When I had enough evidence, I quietly walked back down the hallway and left the hospital without saying a word to any of them. My phone was buzzing with text messages from David asking where I was, but I ignored them as I drove home to begin planning my response to their betrayal. They had no idea that their secret was out, or that their comfortable arrangement was about to come to a devastating end. The drive home from the hospital was surreal as I processed the magnitude of what I had discovered. My husband was having an affair with my sister. They had been stealing money from me to fund their relationship, and my own mother was encouraging and supporting their betrayal. The baby that I had been excited to welcome into our family was likely David's child, which explained his unusual involvement in Rachel's pregnancy. Instead of falling apart emotionally, I felt a cold fury and determination that surprised me. I had been systematically betrayed by the three people who were supposed to love and support me most, and they had been laughing about how clueless I was while planning to continue using me. Their arrogance and cruelty demanded a response that would expose their deception and ensure they faced real consequences for their actions. My first step was to secure our finances and protect myself from further theft. I immediately called our bank and credit card companies to freeze all accounts that David had access to. I transferred money from our joint accounts into a personal account that only I could access. I also called our financial advisor to review all transactions from the past year and identify any unauthorized transfers or suspicious spending patterns. The financial review revealed the full scope of David's theft. Over the past 18 months, he had been systematically moving money from our accounts to pay for Rachel's rent, medical bills, baby expenses, and personal shopping. The total amount exceeded $30,000 money that he had stolen from me while pretending to be a loving husband who was just being generous to family members. Next, I contacted a divorce attorney and explained the situation. The attorney was shocked by the recording I had made and assured me that David's theft and infidelity would work strongly in my favor during divorce proceedings. We began immediately preparing paperwork to file for divorce and to pursue criminal charges for the financial theft. The attorney also helped me understand my options for pursuing civil action to recover the stolen money. While I was taking legal action, I also began planning how to expose their affair publicly. I created copies of the hospital recording and gathered evidence of David's financial theft, including bank statements and credit card records that showed the pattern of money being diverted to Rachel. I also collected text messages and emails that revealed the inappropriate nature of David and Rachel's relationship. David continued calling and texting me throughout the evening, asking where I was and why I had not come to the hospital. I responded with brief messages saying I was not feeling well and would visit Rachel tomorrow. I wanted them to continue believing that their secret was safe, so they would not have time to prepare defenses or destroy additional evidence. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I started by calling Tom and asking him to meet me for coffee to discuss something important about Rachel. Tom was confused but agreed to meet me after his work shift. I also called several close family friends and asked them to come to my house that evening for what I described as an important family announcement. When I met Tom at the coffee shop, I showed him the recording from the hospital and explained what I had discovered about David and Rachel's affair. Tom was initially disbelieving, then devastated as he listened to their conversation and understood that the baby he thought was his was likely David's child. We spent 2 hours going through all the evidence I had gathered, and Tom confirmed several suspicions he had been having about Rachel's behavior and David's frequent visits. That evening, I hosted what became the most dramatic confrontation of my life. David arrived home expecting a normal evening, and Rachel came over with the baby to introduce me to my nephew. My mother was also there, as were several family friends who had known us for years. I had prepared a presentation that included the hospital recording financial evidence and documentation of the affair. I began by thanking everyone for coming to welcome the newest member of our family. Then I played the recording from the hospital, watching their faces as they heard David, Rachel, and my mother discussing their betrayal and describing me as a cash cow and useless failure. The room was silent, except for the sound of their voices revealing their true feelings and plans. The aftermath was immediate and devastating for all three of them. David tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Rachel broke down crying and begging for forgiveness, while simultaneously trying to blame me for not being a better sister and wife. My mother actually tried to defend their actions by saying that true love could not be controlled and that I should be happy for them. The family friends who were present were shocked and disgusted by what they heard. Several of them immediately announced that they would be cutting contact with David, Rachel, and my mother. The social consequences of their public exposure began immediately as word spread through our community about their betrayal and financial theft. The weeks following the confrontation brought a cascade of consequences that completely destroyed the lives that David, Rachel, and my mother had been building on lies and theft. The legal proceedings moved quickly once I presented all the evidence I had gathered. David was charged with financial fraud and theft, facing potential jail time and mandatory restitution of all stolen money plus penalties and interest. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive in my favor. David's theft and infidelity made it impossible for him to claim any portion of our assets, and the judge ordered him to pay significant alimony as additional punishment for his financial crimes. I kept our house, our cars, and all of our savings, while David was left with nothing but legal fees and criminal charges. Rachel's life fell apart even more dramatically. Tom filed for divorce immediately and demanded paternity testing for the baby. When the results confirmed that David was the father, Tom was able to secure a divorce without owing any alimony or child support. Rachel found herself completely alone with a newborn, no husband, no income, and a reputation in our community that made it impossible for her to find employment or social support. My mother faced social ostracism that was swift and total. Her friends and church community were appalled by her role in encouraging the affair and her cruel comments about me. She lost her position on several volunteer committees and found herself excluded from social events and family gatherings. The isolation was particularly difficult for her because she had always defined herself through her social connections and community status. David's career suffered severe damage when his employers learned about his criminal charges and the circumstances of our divorce. His reputation for dishonesty made it difficult for him to maintain client relationships, and he eventually lost his consulting contracts. The financial pressure of legal fees, alimony payments, and reduced income forced him to move in with Rachel in a small apartment that they could barely afford. The most satisfying consequence was watching David and Rachel discover that their relationship could not survive the reality of their situation. Without the excitement of secrecy and the financial cushion provided by my stolen money, they began fighting constantly about money, childcare responsibilities, and their uncertain future. Their great love turned into resentment and blame as they faced the consequences of their choices. Rachel struggled terribly as a single mother without the support system she had always taken for granted. She had expected that David would provide for her and the baby, but his financial ruin made that impossible. She tried reaching out to other family members for help, but most of them had heard about her betrayal and refused to enable her behavior. 6 months after the hospital confrontation, I received a desperate phone call from Rachel, begging me to forgive her and help her with money for the baby. She claimed that she had made a terrible mistake and that she now understood how much she had hurt me. When I refused to provide any assistance, she became angry and accused me of being vindictive and heartless toward an innocent baby. I reminded Rachel that she had made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences and that I had no obligation to support the child of my former husband and unfaithful sister. I also pointed out that she had described me as a useless failure while planning to continue stealing my money, so she should not expect compassion from someone she had treated with such contempt. The final victory came when David and Rachel's relationship completely imploded after 10 months of financial stress and constant conflict. David moved out of their apartment and stopped providing any support for the baby. Rachel was forced to move back in with our mother, creating a toxic living situation where they blamed each other for their circumstances while struggling to survive on my mother's limited retirement income. Today, 2 years after that hospital discovery, I am thriving in ways I never imagined possible. The divorce settlement left me financially secure, and the end of my toxic relationships with David, Rachel, and my mother freed me to build a life based on genuine connections and mutual respect. I eventually met someone who appreciates my generosity without exploiting it, and who supports my goals without trying to manipulate me. David works at a low-paying job and lives in a studio apartment, still paying alimony and dealing with the social consequences of his choices. Rachel struggles as a single mother while working multiple part-time jobs, never having found another partner willing to take on her baggage and reputation. My mother lives alone, having lost most of her friendships and family relationships due to her role in encouraging the betrayal. The experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and protecting myself from people who view kindness as weakness. I learned that family relationships should be based on love and respect rather than obligation and guilt. Most importantly, I discovered that walking away from toxic people, even family members, can be the healthiest and most empowering choice you can make. Their betrayal was devastating at the time, but it ultimately freed me from relationships that were draining my energy and resources without providing genuine love or support in return. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for creating the life you actually deserve. Have you ever discovered that family members were betraying your trust or taking advantage of your generosity? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn about setting boundaries with toxic relatives? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else recognize similar warning signs. Please like this video if my story helped you understand the importance of protecting yourself from manipulative family members. Subscribe for more real stories about overcoming betrayal and building authentic relationships. Share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up to family members who are taking advantage of their kindness. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships based on genuine love and respect, not exploitation disguised as family loyalty.